Hi, this is Bob Baker. Welcome to The Creative Entrepreneur. Before we jump into this latest interview, I just want to make sure that you don't miss any of the awesome interviews that I'm posting, nearly one every week. It's really easy to stay informed. You can get on the VIP email list. It's free, and I'll send you an email every time I post a new interview. Just go to DIYcareermanifesto.com, get on the email list, and you're set. And another cool perk to getting on the list is that I will also send you a big, fat, free sample of my new book called The DIY Career Manifesto. It's the unconventional guide to turning your talents and your know-how into a profitable business, just like a lot of the people that I interview. So get on the list, DIYcareermanifesto.com. And now on to this week's interview. Welcome to The Creative Entrepreneur. Bob Baker here, and I'm really excited to be talking to a fellow writer, a blogger, an author. I'm speaking with, of course, is Jeff Goins. Is your last name pronounced Goins? Is that right?
That's right, Bob.
I should have asked prior to recording, but there we are. We're jumping out on the because I've heard people mispronounce it by saying Goins, but it's Jeff Goins, right?
That's right. Yeah, you must not be from the South, because whenever it crosses the Mason-Dixon line, it gains a syllable, and I've exhausted myself trying to correct it, but I'm just like, whatever. Either is fine for me.
Right. Well, being named Bob Baker, I've been called that game show host named Bob Barker most of my life.
Yeah.
So I guess that's
funny.
my own version of wrestling with that.
Yeah.
But man, so I've been following you online probably for at least a year, and you were one of these guys. It seems like every year or two there's someone that seemingly sort of comes out of nowhere and just really makes an impact on the internet. Of course, I'm tuned to keep my radar up for people in the writing and the publishing world, and
Sure.
And just looking over your sort of about page on your website, it sounds like you, I guess, actively started blogging in 2010. So you've been at it roughly 3 years, right?
Yeah.
And there's sort of a new breed of I don't know, blogger or whatever. It's like I think of the old school ways of like establishing yourself as an expert is you just sort of come on the scene as I am the expert, I am the guru. But there's I guess a number of people like Pat Flynn comes to mind. I know he's a friend and he's interviewed you recently, and other people that actually use their blog to sort of chronicle their journey. Like and I think, was that your case? Like you're saying, I'm trying to figure out this writing and publishing thing, and follow me as I figure it out.
Yeah. And the backstory is I started that blog at the end of 2010, early 2011. The backstory is I had probably close to a dozen blogs before that over the course of 4 or 5 years, and none of them ever gained any traction. And every time I'd take a shower, I'd get a new idea, and I'm like, that should be a new blog, and I'd start it, and it'd go for like 3 months, and then I'd lose my passion. And so a few years ago, I decided that I wanted to be a writer, really be a writer, and publish books and do that whole thing and really take it seriously. And I knew that I needed a platform, something that I'd never really fully vested myself into. And so this was my opportunity to do that. And I thought, why not share the journey, as I'm going on it, and just maybe, as I go through this and learn what it takes to become a published author, I can, share what I'm learning with other writers who have these same aspirations.
Awesome. If I'm not mistaken, part of your message, I think you have some blog posts on it about that, claiming that title of being a writer. Like a lot of people say, oh, I'm trying to be a writer, I'm hoping to be a writer. And what's your philosophy about that?
Yeah, well, I think it's true for any vocation, at least any creative vocation. And I think the reality is, in order for you to be something, you have to claim it. You have to believe you are that something before you can do it. And, I don't know how you become an astronaut or, a police officer or, all these things that require a badge or some sort of accreditation. I mean, of course, we kind of know what that looks like. You got to go to school and you got to do this. But when it comes to being an artist or even an entrepreneur, there's not really a badge or a certificate that you can get. You have to own it. There's part of you that has to believe it before you'll be able to do it. And I think this is more than faking it until you make it. I think it's really believing who you are so that you can become who you were meant to be.
Absolutely. Well said. There's an old a lot of different motivational speakers, whatever, over the years have talked about this concept of be, do, have. You know, a lot of people have it in reverse. They go, boy, if only I had the best-selling book, then I would do the things a best-selling author does. Then I would be a best-selling, or a successful author. And it's really the other way around. First, you have to own that, feel that that you are a successful author, whether you have an audience of 3 or 3 million, right? Mm-hmm. And then you start acting from that sense of knowing. Yeah. And then stuff starts happening in the real world, hopefully.
Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, it's really difficult to act in a certain way or believe that you are something where you don't see any evidence of being that thing. You know, you're worried that people are going to call you out and call your bluff, and that's a legitimate fear. But when you're beginning, I don't know where else to begin but identity. And what I do know is that the reverse does not get you where you need to be, which is that most artists, writers, people who are wanting to get started in some sort of creative vocation, when I ask them, you know, what do you do? Who are you? You know, what are you? They use words like aspiring and wannabe, and they will not claim, I'm a writer, I'm an artist, I'm a musician, because they're afraid. And what I do know is that not claiming it sabotages a lot of great work.
Awesome. And I know you have a book out that I think is relatively new called The InBetween. And the subtitle is Embracing the Tension Between Now and the Next Big Thing. And it's actually not about writing specifically at all, isn't it? It's more of a personal growth type of book, or what? Explain what it's about.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I didn't want to be this writer who writes about writing about writing about writing. You know, like that's certainly a part of my platform. But I want to go out there and take the real risks and do the real things so that when I'm talking about writing, I'm not talking about on my blog about writing, how I wrote this book about writing. You know, like I want to be living the writer's life, and I have things to talk about besides just writing. Mm-hmm. So this book is about that space that we all live in, which is the space in between the last big thing that happened and the next big thing that's going to happen. And I begin the book with this quote by Annie Dillard, where she says, how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. Kind of this, you know, idea about habit formation and what we do with these seemingly insignificant times. Mm-hmm. And what I've learned from looking back at my life, and the book is a collection of stories, of nonfiction essays, and then some of my reflections on that, most of life is these times in between, these seemingly insignificant moments. And as a writer, I've learned that these are the times that I grow, that I become who I'm supposed to be, or not. That I can waste these times. And so there's a chapter in that book where I talk about how I found my calling as a writer, and I realized that it wasn't so much deciding to become something as it was a realization that I already was this thing. I just needed to act like it and step into it. And so I think that there's a lot of lessons that we as creative people can learn when we look at the in-between, when we look at the boring stuff, the mundane things that happen in between the quote-unquote big moments in life.
Right, because I think there's a lot of focus on follow your passion, and there might be a misconception that every moment you're like energized and engaged, and actually there's a lot of hurry up and wait. There's a lot of times when you have to sit your butt in a chair, like as a writer, when you may not feel like it. But there are moments of passion, but it's mixed in with this patience, I think is another thing that you talk about there. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the book is about waiting. It's about how we can appreciate what we have right now and live life to the fullest wherever we are. And it also is kind of this exploration of this idea of if I'm waiting for the then, like when I become a published author, when I sell 100,000 copies of my record, when I do this, then I'll be happy. And I think the reality is, if you can't be happy now, if you can't be content where you are right now, what makes you think you're going to be that way when the then comes? Because when every then comes, there's another one, on the distant horizon.
That's advice we can all, myself included, could stand to embrace a little bit more.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, Jeff, that's a great overview of your background and your philosophy. So let's go into my standard list of questions to find out the keys to your success. If you had to identify 3 factors that allowed you to get to this point where you are with this high profile and, living the dream, if you would, what would those be?
Well, I think we talked about it earlier, this sense of identity, although it feels kind of esoteric, I don't really know how you quantify that. I think it's really important to make a decision, to do what Stephen Pressfield calls turning pro,
Mm.
to decide I am this thing and now I'm going to act like it. So I think every artist at a certain point, and even I have lots of friends who are entrepreneurs, and they say the same thing. They say that before they could achieve success, they had to somehow visualize it or see it in their mind. And so I think that that faith element is very important. Whatever that looks like for you, you have to believe that this thing is possible, and that in some way you already are what you want to be in order to achieve it. Otherwise, you're just constantly going to be plagued with this self-doubt. And so for me, a sense of identity, and it is a broken, tattered, weak sense of identity where I'm constantly pushing back the demons every day, saying, no, I can do this. Dealing with fear and all of that. So I don't want to come off saying that you have to have it all together. I don't have it all together, but I have made this decision that I am a writer, and therefore I'm going to do what writers do, which is write. I'm not going to play this game of maybe I am, maybe I'm not, because it's just a waste of time. So that was a really important decision for me. The second thing I think was not just following my passion, but building an audience and a platform around helping people. And I think that business people understand this better than artists do. We understand that in business, you have to add value to the market. You have to create something that's going to make people's lives better, because then they're going to pay you for it. Whereas artists are called to, a different kind of vocation where we create beautiful things and got to figure out how to make it. And I have found that there is a wonderful synergy between art and business, where you can create beautiful things that also add value to people's lives, be resourceful, use what you know to be helpful to people, and that can make your art that much more viable and sustainable. And so for me, what that looked like was, instead of just building a blog around, here's my writing, I hope you love it, pay me lots of money to keep creating my art, I was really intentional about asking questions and finding out ways that I could help people. And how I found how to do that was, what are people currently struggling with that are problems I've already solved or are maybe dealing with in the present? But I realized that I did have some experience from which to draw that I could help people with. And I think the last thing, and this is, again, kind of being a little bit esoteric, but not just being helpful, but being generous. And so what that looked like for me as a writer was, for a good solid year, I wrote 300 articles for my blog, almost one post a day. Lots of helpful content that I just gave away for free, because it helped me practice and it allowed me to engage with an audience. And if yesterday's article didn't engage, that's okay. I had another opportunity to do that today. And then I wrote another something like 100 articles for guest publications and guest websites. So I wrote 400 articles in a year, which is, I'm not great at math, but I think that's more than one a day.
It is definitely.
And in that time, I never once tried to sell my audience anything. I never tried to do anything to make money off of this, because it was very important to me to earn their trust. And the way that I earned trust was by being generous. I gave away free ebooks. I gave away articles and resources and opportunities to connect with me. And I wasn't anybody at the time, but there were still people that I found I could help. And so for me, it was really important to believe who I was, to be helpful, and then to be very intentional about giving away my best work for free. And I don't do that. I don't always do that. Now, I mean, there are some things that you get to pay for, like my book that you mentioned.
Right.
But I still do that sometimes. I think it's very important to continue earning trust. And we know that art is a gift that we give to the world, that when you create something, that it's a gift. And so you have a responsibility to be generous with it. And if you are generous enough and you do good enough work, there will be people willing to pay you for it. And that's what I found.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. Let me ask a couple of little follow-up questions here on those. Three great keys there. On the first one, the sense of identity. I know we talked a little bit about it at the beginning, and I wanted to ask it then, and I forgot. so there is a difference between owning that I am a writer, I am an artist, I am a musician, and being cocky. Like somebody can take that too far and end up turning people off. So isn't there a certain way to embrace that, where it's almost more like an internal calm confidence than something that you're boasting to the world, right? Is that a good clarification to make?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love what Anne Lamott says about this. She says, if you write, you're a writer. Mm-hmm. Now you need to go get good. And so there's nothing boastful or arrogant about saying I'm a writer, just like there's nothing boastful about saying I'm a plumber,
right?
You know?
Right.
Now, if you said I'm the world's best plumber, like we'd go, really? Like that's something other people get to say about you. And the same thing's true about I'm a great writer. Like you wouldn't say that, but other people could say that about you. But there's nothing wrong with saying I am this thing. I do this thing, therefore I am this thing. All a writer is someone who writes. And it's up to you whether or not you're going to take that seriously and get good. And in terms of how well you do it, that's up for us, the audience, to say about you. It's not up to you to say.
Right. So that's actually a great clarification. Own it. Say I am this thing, but don't be telling people. Yeah, like for decades, for musicians, and going, man, I'm the best thing since the Beatles and Elvis combined,
right.
Or whatever. Or, you know.
Right.
And that's So there's a line that you can cross or with that, but you're just talking about owning the title or the fact that you are that artist simply because you create, and I think that's an awesome distinction to make. I love what you said about being helpful. Yeah, and then a lot of creative people, they don't realize or don't. They maybe forget what it's like to be a fan themselves, and so they think that marketing or promoting themselves is about being boastful. Again, what's really about reminding the person, being helpful, and realizing the value that you provide, whether it's art, whether it's music. And I think that's another shift that people have to make to be successful and market themselves is understand that what you create touches people, hopefully in meaningful ways, and knowing what that is is crucial. Maybe making sure that whatever you create does more of that, is probably an essential key to success.
Yeah, and one example of that, Bob, especially contextualizing it for music, because it's one thing to say, hey, I'm a writer and I started this blog and now I help other people become writers, and that may or may not feel accessible depending on what your craft is. But I see musicians doing this. The ones who get it, I see them doing it pretty well. And one of the ways that they're doing it is they're empowering their fans to be generous. They're making their fans be the ones who are in some ways spreading their music, not as marketers, but as people who get to be generous to their friends. And so an example of that is I just heard about, I forget what band it was, but I just heard about this band who had a record release and they had 2 CDs in the packaging of the product, and it was like 2 CDs, the same CD, right? The record put together. And when you opened it, there was a little perforated edge where you could tear it and you could share it with somebody.
Nice.
And so you paid $15 because, a lot of the fixed costs are pretty much set at that point, to add another CD that doesn't cost an extra whatever it costs to make it. So it doesn't cost them that much more to manufacture one with an extra CD, and then they can tear it and they can give it to a friend. And so they were, instead of saying, steal our music, don't steal our music, buy our music, but now you can be generous to your friends. Really cool way to share their music.
That is awesome. I had never heard of the perforated CD. I'd love to look up that packaging there. And we didn't. Yeah, I know we talked about it before I started the recording, but you actually are a musician and used to tour with the band. Back in the And what did you play an instrument?
Yeah, I was the lead guitarist and the driver and the road manager,
and the roadie and everything.
The roadie, everything.
Oh, yeah. Cool. Okay, cool. Yeah, for those, I know I have a lot of musicians that follow my stuff, so they'll be interested to know you have those roots. And there's one more thing about the thing you talk about being generous, and what I've noticed in this is, I don't know, about the 15th interview that I've done in this series, but people who are successful are prolific. They don't just put out 1 or 2 things every now and then. Like you know who Joel Freelander is, right? He's called the book designer, and he was one of the.
Sure.
I interviewed him early on in this series, and he just another guy that kind of came on the scene out of nowhere, and he just like blogged every day. He just bombarded the internet with helpful articles on his topic, and he gained a reputation as that. And an artist, Tom Fedro from Chicago, like paints like 1 or 2 paintings a day. He ends up selling like 350 of them a year. I mean, so you got to crank out a volume of stuff because not everyone is gonna connect. And so I'm glad that you pointed that out, that you almost have to in the early days, especially building your career, is just be prolific, crank out a lot of stuff. Don't be afraid. Don't be hung up by it's got to be perfect to get out into the world. Just share it.
And it's the best way to practice too.
Right,
the best way to get better.
And you hone your skills. And then this thing of guest posting, like a lot of people will go, "Oh, I'm not worthy. I'm not an expert. They're not going to care." But were you approaching these sort of prominent blogs even before you really had much of a reputation? And did you find that process to be easy, hard? What?
Yeah, I did. I was intentional about how I did it. I realized early on that blogging is very relational, and the internet is very relational, especially social media. And I think life, business, it's all pretty, it's not just what you can do. A part of success is who you know and how you are known. And I realized that it's not just about who you know, it's about who you help. And so by offering a really helpful article, even to a prominent blog that's going to add value to their community, and offering it for free, not getting paid for that content, that is being helpful. And so the ways that I did that was, I found a way to guest post on a friend's site, and then I found that friend of a friend, and then I just got, and I found out that they had, guest posted on a blog with 10,000 readers, and so then I, had them introduce me, and I just through relationships built a network of people that allowed me to get in front of audiences of 1 million plus people. And I didn't shoot the moon on the first time. I took these gradual steps, but every time I had a new opportunity, I tried to stretch it the most that I could to step into that new opportunity that would hopefully grow me and give me an opportunity to connect with a larger audience.
Awesome. Great advice. So, Jeff, we've talked a lot about the keys to success and examined them from many different angles, but let's talk a little bit about challenges too. And so can you identify maybe a creative or a business challenge that you faced sometime in your career, how you overcame it, and what you learned from it?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you the challenge that I'm facing daily. And I feel like I'm dealing with it. Just a little bit of backstory. So I did this thing on the side for about, 2.5 years. And then at the end of last year, I had a published book, another book contract, and I had at first replaced my wife's income with a self-published ebook, and then I had started teaching an online course, and that had started going really well. And so by the end of last year, we had tripled our income. And so I realized not only did my wife get to stay home and raise our son, which was a goal of last year for me, really the goal, now I could quit my job if I wanted to, which was not expected. And so I was kind of stressing about that. And I talked to my boss about it. And he said, he goes, "Man, I've been waiting for this. I'm really excited for you. I'm proud of you." And so that was really cool to, get his blessing and go out and do that. And so fast forward almost a year, I've been doing this, full time now. And one of the challenges that I never anticipated was what I would do with all this time. And part of that is boredom, and part of that is procrastination. So I've had to find ways to not be bored, and I've had to find ways to use the time that I have, because instead of having 30 minutes or an hour to write a blog post or work on my book per day, I now have, 6, 7, 8 hours if I want, and I can squander that time. I was actually less productive this year than I was last year, and I've had more time. And so the challenge for me is managing my own schedule and being as productive as I was with less time now that I have more time, and learning how to use that time without getting bored and also being, effective. And so for me, it's come down to habits. And there were 3 things that I did to get to where I am. And I realized halfway through this year, maybe what I did to get here is the same thing that I need to do to keep going and get to the next level. And so for me, that's 3 basic habits, 3 things that I do almost on a daily, definitely a weekly basis. And they are, I do something to build my craft, which could be reading a book, it could be writing, working on a book. Often it's writing. I might be writing a blog post for my blog, for somewhere else, but I'm practicing getting better. Could be going to a conference, any of those things. Then I do something to build my brand, because we all understand that without a brand, without people knowing who you are and what you have to offer, that you're irrelevant, that you're just noise. And so it's important to me to find ways to continue being generous, be helpful, connect with people in a way that creates, some sort of positive impression of me and what I do. And then lastly, I do something to build my business, something that's going to generate revenue either now or in the near future. Because if I'm not generating revenue, I'm not paying my bills, and I'm not going to have any margin in my life to create art and do those kinds of things. And so if I find that if I'm doing those three things every week, often every day, in a very intentional, measurable way, my craft is growing, so I'm getting better. So I feel like I'm continuing to pursue art, but I'm also creating better and better stuff for my audience. My brand is growing, therefore I'm having more people to connect with, so that what I'm doing isn't stagnating. And lastly, my business is growing, so that I can continue to pay for the things that allow me to do what I want to do, and keep doing it. And so those three things are ways that I kind of measure my productivity and my effectiveness when I sometimes feel bored or want to procrastinate. And I was just reading about, Stephen Pressfield. He was talking in a book about how hard it is to be a full-time writer, because there's nobody who says, hey, how many words did you write today? What did you do? How did you spend your time? And so it's really important to me to have some ways to measure my effectiveness, and they need to be loose enough that I don't feel constant shame, but specific enough that I feel like I'm doing something, that I'm gaining momentum as I show up and do the work.
Awesome. Thanks for being so transparent and and letting us in on your world. I guess that's one thing we didn't establish early on, and I'm glad you clarified there. So you've been full time at this for about a year, did you say?
Yeah, less than a year. It's been 8 months maybe.
Oh wow, cool. So basically it took you, if you started your blog in 2010, it was about 2 years to get to the point where you built up the audience and that was willing to exchange, I guess, money for the value that you provide when you offered something for sale. So that is awesome. I mean, so that's really encouraging that it can be done in a relatively short period of time. And I totally know what you're saying. I've been self-employed off and on through much of my adult life, this most recent stint for 10 years. Yeah. But that is it is a big shift, and it is fascinating how when you have little time, because when I did have a full-time job, my daughter was a toddler, and I actually wrote a book that I was called Branding Yourself Online. It came out like in 2001. And that's like $100,000 words that I wrote somehow in my spare time around a full-time job. I did like 6 months,
Crazy.
And I remember just fighting off sleep nights and weekends working on it, and I look back and think, how in the heck did I do that? Now when the time expands, it's the fact that you were less productive when you had more time. So there is definitely a shift that takes place when you go into the self-employment role, and a lot of self-discipline, or maybe finding, if you need somebody else, maybe you have an accountability partner or a mastermind or something. There's ways of probably getting that into your life if you're not able to do it on your own completely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem.
Let's go into the advice that you would give to your younger self. So this is a 3-part question, and we may have already touched on some of this, but let's kind of hit it again. So if you can go back and have a conversation, I don't know, you can pick the time, whether it was back in 2010 or back before you started all those earlier blogs or whenever, and give yourself 3 pieces of advice, and you say, young Jeff, what would you do? Here are the things that I think you should do exactly the same because those worked for you. Here is a thing or two that you should completely avoid because it ended up being a time waster. And here was something good that you actually should have done earlier if you had only had the wisdom to know. So we'll just take them one at a time. What would you do exactly the same?
Mm-hmm. I think that my 20s were this period of struggling with this tug between adventure and commitment, and so I studied abroad in Spain my junior year of college, and I was like, this is great. I'm going to travel the world the rest of my life. And so I graduated college. I joined this band, spent some time in Taiwan. Like I was like, I'm going to travel for the rest of my life. I think the thing that I wouldn't have done much differently is I wouldn't have changed this transition from living an adventurous life to being a father and a dad, and having a house and doing that. I think the transition for that went well. I learned some difficult lessons about commitment and overcommitment and not being, committed enough. A lot of which were, reinforced by my wife, who helped me grow up. But I think the way that I grew up over my 20s was it was good. It was healthy. It was a good enough transition that now that I've turned 30, I feel like I was ready for this. And so something that I would love to tell myself, at 20 is not, hey, everything's going to be okay, but take your time, because I always felt like I was in a rush to do the next thing, and all those things happened. And the transition happened, but I was often in a rush, missing what was right in front of me or beside me or around me, trying to get to that next thing. And that was, getting out of college. It was when I was traveling on the road, it was getting to the next gig, even if we were on the road for 12 hours that day, only to play a 45-minute show. And it was getting married, and it was, all these arrival points. I would have told myself to slow down and just take your time. You're going to get there. And I wouldn't have adjusted the pace as much as I would have adjusted my perspective.
Cool. That sounds like that's definitely a part of your book, as we talked about earlier. So it's more a lot, instead of making things happen, it's almost like allowing them to happen and enjoying the moment and the journey, right?
Things are going to happen regardless. Just appreciate them when they do.
Absolutely. So what are things, maybe some time wasters or things that you would recommend to your younger self that you avoid?
Yeah. I would tell this to myself now, and I would also tell this to myself when I was 18, 19, or 20, which is stop comparing yourself. It doesn't really help you, because there's always somebody that's going to be a step ahead or 10 steps ahead or a step or 10 steps behind you. And when you're comparing yourself, one of two things is going to happen. They're going to be ahead of you and you're going to feel bad, or they're going to be behind you and you're going to feel good in the wrong kind of way. You're going to feel arrogant, like I'm better than that guy.
Right.
Neither of those are helpful. What's helpful is you living up to your creative potential, to be who you were made to be. And so I would tell myself to, and I would continue to tell myself, stop comparing yourself to others, because it's the most unproductive activity you can do.
Right. There's a thing that a lot of people do, and every now and then I think I pretty much stopped doing this myself. But when you read about someone who's successful, the latest best-selling self-published author or an indie musician who really did, and they go, oh man, but look, their music is crap, or are you like
right.
downplay them, or even with Justin Bieber or Rebecca Black and the Silly Friday song,
Yeah.
I think you should go, wow, congratulations, good for them. That's showing me that it's possible, as opposed to, and so I think that perspective of applauding others' success instead of comparing yourself and going, oh, I don't measure up. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good, Bob. It's really healthy.
Cool. And then what would you add into the mix? Something good that you would have done earlier had you had the wisdom to know at the time.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I have a sister who's 10 years younger than me, and she has been blogging for at least pretty, solidly through most of her college experience. So she's a junior in college now, and for the past year or two, she's been blogging very regularly. And I've just been so impressed and so proud of seeing her do that. And my one regret, the one thing that I would tell myself to do is start writing sooner, really writing, and start blogging. I mean, because 10 years ago we had blogs, this, Bob.
Yeah.
Like we did, it wasn't this, widespread thing that everybody did that people were sick of already. But I wish I would have done that earlier. I would have had a lot more to show for it by now. And I don't necessarily, I like where I am. I feel like, I'm very grateful for it. But I'm just looking at my sister. I'm going, man, you are way ahead of the curve. Like, she's getting ready to publish an ebook and she's still in college.
Right.
I'm like, I said, this is just awesome. This is so cool. I'm so excited for you. And I'm jealous because I compare how good of a writer she is to how good of a writer I was then. And she's way better. Why? Because she's blogging. She's practicing in public. She's regularly publishing work and shipping it and getting, critiqued for it, getting, critical eyes. And when you do that, you have to do your best work. Whereas when I was 20, I was, writing half-written essays and articles and throwing them away and still struggling with this idea, am I right or am I not? And I would have just started sooner.
Right. I deal with a lot of, authors, and they're especially when they publish their first books, I like to celebrate with people, and I never hear anybody go, I could have waited another 10 years to do this. It's always, man, why didn't I do this?
I know.
I'm ready for the next one,
Oh, totally.
So do it now, baby.
Yeah.
All right, Jeff, as an author, I'm sure you're also a voracious reader. And so in the same way that your book and your writing is now touching people's lives, I'm sure you've been touched by other authors. If you could identify one book that changed your life, what would that be, and why did it change it?
I love the book The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. I read that. I had a friend in college who gave me some great advice. He said, read one book for pleasure per semester. And in college, you just feel like, read one more book? Are you kidding me? I can't read the books that, that I've been assigned to read. But that was such great advice. And I started doing that probably my junior year. And it was just a great way to bring some sanity back into a pretty insane schedule. And one of the books that I read in college and continue to read pretty regularly is The Alchemist, which is just a short, probably less than 200-page book. And it's a fable. It's about one boy's search for his life's treasure. And there's just tons of great principles about not settling for anything less than your dream, and about these temptations to pursue things that look like success but aren't exactly what you would call your treasure. And, at different seasons in life, I look at that through a different lens. But it's a great book. I would recommend it to anybody.
Oh, cool. And I've heard that book has been recommended. I may even have a copy somewhere in the house, but I don't think I've actually read it. So this is another nudge, a reminder that I need to check that out too, because it's one of those like sleeper titles that everybody, somebody, I think a consistently good seller. Even though I'm not sure if it's ever been on the bestseller list, but it's one that people recommend a lot. So here's a kind of this is an essential question. I think I'm sure we've already touched on this, but there's a lot of things that motivate people to pursue their passions, to pursue their a self-employment thing. But I always like to ask this sort of rock bottom question: what truly motivates you to do all this stuff, all this blogging and getting books out there? What's the bottom line for you?
I don't have a great way to put this other than to say that I really feel called to this work. And I'm a big proponent in calling, whether you feel that is, a nudge from the muse or call from God. But for me, I do feel as if there is something in me that needs to get out in the world, that there is some that there is art, there is work that I have to share, to do, that is in some way going to make the world a better place, even if it's, for a limited number of people. And that really compels me to do what I do, is this sense that I've been called, not just motivated by my own ambition or desire for success, but that this is something that that I have to do, that I can't not do. I really feel compelled to do this. And so, there are other factors, my family, the motivation to create really great art, because that's a good thing in and of itself. But at the end of the day, I do this because I'm called to do it. Right.
Like 20 years ago, I interviewed Sheryl Crow. It was like 6 months before she really broke out. I mean, her debut album had come out, but it wasn't on the radio yet or anything. And she actually has roots. She was actually born and raised in Missouri and lived in St. Louis, in my hometown, for a while. And so I had no idea, that was gonna happen with her career. But I remember asking her, what motivated her to go out to L.A. and to do all the things that led to her debut album. And I still to this day remember her saying, I felt like I had something to say. Yeah. She felt there was something, great. And so she was compelled to take whatever steps it took to get that out. And so that's very much related to your answer there. And then, so future plans. We talked a lot about, your intense blogging, and for the past year, 8 months or so, you've been self-employed. Again, congratulations for that.
Thanks.
Supporting your family. So you're still kind of, and you're like are you 30? Is that what you said
30,
earlier?
yeah.
Wow, that's an amazing list of accomplishments for a young age there. And so, yeah, you have many decades in front of you. What's on the horizon for Jeff Goins?
Well, great segue, probably unintentionally. I want to write a book about finding your calling. And so, what does that look like for each and every person? Like, what is the work that you were born to do? And some people might call it finding your purpose or living your dream. I'm very interested in that. I've been reading a lot about it, talking to a lot of people about it. I've had my own personal experience and pursuit, and I want to understand what is it that drives us to do things that matter, not just that make a living, but bring life to the world in some way. And so I'm working on something, working on a book about that, and I'm also probably going to do like an online course to cover some of the practical elements of that, not just how do we find our life's work, but how do we do it in a way that's sustainably, like that's a sustainable business that is going to allow you to make a living and provide for yourself, and do it in a scalable way that's going to reach the most people possible. So that's probably what's next.
Cool. And I know, I think we kind of breezed over it earlier in the discussion about you going, being full time for 8 months or so. But your business model, I guess, are your, as transparent or as little as you want to. But I know you got the new book out, so I mentioned that's a revenue stream. But that's not the only one. You mentioned I think you mentioned previous online courses that you've created. And do you do any consulting, or what are your streams there that you've developed that maybe others can be inspired by? Because it's usually not just one source of income that self-employment people have.
Yeah, so basically my model is I write and publish books, and the revenue from that is it's nice, but I don't count on it because it might take 18 months for a book to come out, Right. So I don't really count on that, but I do that to legitimize my platform to be able to sell information products to other writers and creatives and entrepreneurially minded people. So what that looks like is, I publish books. I've got a self-published ebook. I've got a few online products, the most successful of which is an online course for writers called Tribe Writers, which is at tribewriters.com. I do some speaking, consulting, a little bit of coaching, but I would say most of the revenue is through information product sales like the course.
Cool. Okay, so even though your book is not for writers, you've got other resources and info products, if you want to, that are geared for writers too. So I knew you were serving that audience in some way.
Yep.
And so speaking of that, where can people find out about you and all the cool stuff that you're doing online?
You can go to my blog, goinswriter.com, and I've got a free newsletter that you can sign up for there. That's probably the best way to connect with me and get a bunch of free stuff.
And Goins, of course, is Goins, and then writer, singular.com.
Yeah. That's right.
And I'm sure I know you're active on social media and all that good stuff. So Jeff, well, thank you so much for taking the time. And man, you're just like I said, at 30, you've got you sound like an old soul with so much wisdom, And so if you've accomplished this much in your young life, I mean, I can't wait to see what the future holds for you. So I hope to meet you sometime when I'm in the Nashville area. That would be awesome. But thanks for taking your time to share your wisdom with us today.
Well, thank you, Bob. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. So this is wraps up this episode. I'll be back with another amazing person in the Creative Entrepreneur Series probably next week. So thanks for watching and listening, and I'll see you next time. So long. And so you got the list of questions and things that I...
Yeah. I only have one question. Who did all these awesome prints on your wall?
Oh, cool! Thank you for asking. So I have many varied creative interests, and actually acrylic painting is something I've been doing for like 40 years. So those are actually all my artwork there.
That's great. I love the Elvis one.
Oh, thank you. Neat. Thank you. I switch them around because they've been in the background for a while, and so and it's something I did under the radar for most of my life. But like a year ago or so, I kind of came out of the closet, as it were, started posting things on Facebook and getting really positive reactions. So I said, why hide this gift? Which I think is one part of your message too.
Totally. Yeah, love that.
So well, thank you for asking.